The letter from Liz Reiher arrived on a Tuesday, which Caldwin Mourne had always considered the most honest day of the week. Not the false promise of Monday's beginnings, not the relief of Friday's endings, just the plain middle ground where work was either done or not done, and the world did not particularly care which. He read it twice in the cold grey light of his room at the Way Station Inn in Harrock's Crossing, a town that existed primarily to give travellers a reason to stop moving. The letter was short. Liz had never been given to ornament. She wrote that she had examined the lowest inscription on the staff, the Derwin notation he had flagged near the base, and confirmed that it referenced a working she could not decipher alone. She did not ask for his help directly. She simply informed him of where she was going, as though that were a different thing. It was not. Caldwin set the letter beside his journal and looked out the window at the grey hills beyond Harrock's Crossing.
His formal research request to the Grand Repository in Aylrest had been approved 3 weeks prior. He had been planning to travel there at a measured pace, stopping at the smaller temple libraries along the Eastern Road to build context before addressing the major collection, a scholar's approach, methodical, safe. He picked up his pen, opened his journal to a fresh page, and wrote at the top, Aldenmoor, the unfinished working. What was Serena Reiher trying to do? Then, below it, a second line that surprised him somewhat. What did she find that made it necessary? He packed that morning and took the faster road. The Grand Repository of Aylrest occupied the entire eastern quarter of the city, a complex of interconnected buildings in pale limestone that had been growing, organically and somewhat chaotically, for 400 years.
From the street, it looked less like a single institution and more like a neighborhood that had decided to dedicate itself entirely to the storage of information. Archways connecting towers, covered walkways bridging reading rooms, a large central dome that housed the most significant primary collections under enchanted climate controls designed to preserve vellum and parchment against the particular cruelty of time. The repository's chief archivist, a dwarf woman named Bryndis Stonemantle, met Caldwin at the intake desk with the focused efficiency of someone who received too many scholars and had developed a precise system for sorting them by usefulness. She was compact and sharp-eyed, with iron-gray braids pinned back from her face and ink on her left hand that appeared to be a permanent condition rather than an accident. Sir Mourne, she said, reviewing his credentials with the expression of someone checking arithmetic. Temple of Ion, Thornwall Chapter, 11 years cataloging.
Recent field work. She looked up. The Aldenmoor survey. That was you? Partly. I was part of a team. The structural assessment of the sunken ward is the best we've had in 50 years. We've been trying to get scholars down there for decades. She closed the credential folder. What specifically are you looking for? Pre-collapse arcane research, Caldwin said. Specifically anything connected to the Reiher family. Serena Reiher was Chancellor of Aldenmoor's arcane records. I'm looking for documentation of a magical working she was conducting at the time of the collapse. It may have involved the interaction between enchantment magic and living magical creatures. The working was unfinished. Bryndis was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant she knew something. Come with me, she said.
She led him not to the main reading rooms, but through a side corridor that descended 2 flights below the street, into a section of the repository that smelled of old stone and something else, something faintly electric, like the air before lightning, which Caldwin recognized after a moment as the residue of very old magic that had been in close proximity to written material for a very long time. We have 43 boxes of Aldenmoor archival material, Bryndis said as they walked, recovered over the past 50 years from various secondary sites, Not the sunken ward itself, but estates, secondary archives, courier records that survived in private hands. Most of it has been catalogued at the surface level. Some of it has not been read by anyone since it arrived. She stopped at a heavy oak door bound with iron and unlocked it with a key she wore on a chain around her neck. "Box 31, she said. "I've looked at it twice and put it back both times."
"It is not my area." She pushed the door open and stood aside. "It may be yours." The room beyond was small and cool, lit by a continual flame lantern in a wire cage on the ceiling. On the central table, as though it had been waiting, sat a wooden archive box stamped in faded ink with the seal of Aldenmoor's arcane chancellery. Caldwin sat down, opened his journal, and lifted the lid. The box contained 47 documents. Caldwin knew this because the first thing inside was a manifest, written in a neat, spare hand that he recognized after a moment, the same hand as the inscription on the golden staff's plinth. "Held in trust until called home." Serena Reiher had made this list herself, and she had numbered every item. He did not rush. Rushing through primary documents was the scholarly equivalent of running through a room full of glassware.
He set the manifest to one side and began lifting items out one by one, reading enough to understand what each was before setting it carefully in sequence on the table. Letters. Budgetary ledgers for the Arcane Chancellery's Research Division. 3 documents that appeared to be early drafts of the formal Dervan inscription he'd seen above the vault plinth. A set of pressed botanical specimens, which surprised him until he noted from the manifest that they were referenced in document 32, a research record. The research records were items 28 through 41, and they were where things became interesting, in the way that interesting things sometimes became alarming before they became interesting again. Document 28 was a standard experimental log, controlled trials for extending the duration of enchantment spells on non-organic materials. This was recognizable work, the kind that any competent artificer of Serena's period would have conducted.
The notation style was precise and unsentimental. Hypothesis, method, result, variation. The results were good, unusually good, actually, in ways that Caldwin noted but filed for later consideration. Documents 29 and 30 were more specific, records of what Serena called sympathetic resonance trials, an attempt to determine whether an enchanted object could be made to sustain and amplify its stored magic by proximity to a living magical source. This was less standard. In fact, Caldwin was not certain it had been standard practice even in Aldenmoor's time. He wrote in his journal, "Sympathetic resonance. Was this theory, or was this an established discipline? Check Ailrest secondary collections for parallel research." Document 31 stopped him entirely. It was longer than the others, 12 pages of dense notation, with diagrams in the margins that he had to look at for some time before he understood what he was seeing.
The subject of the research was a creature called, in Serena's notation, a luminarch, which Caldwin did not immediately recognize, because the name was not used in any modern bestiary or arcane taxonomy he had encountered. He wrote it down carefully and underlined it. The diagrams showed, in clean diagrammatic strokes, the magical anatomy of something winged. Not a bird. The proportions were wrong for a bird. Too long in the body, the wingspan too vast, the head too large, and held at an angle that suggested significant cognitive capacity. More significantly, the diagrams included what Serena had labeled as a core resonance map, a rendering of the creature's internal magical structure, showing where and how arcane energy moved through it. The creature, whatever it was, did not generate magic the way a wizard did, through training and intention. Its magic was structural, intrinsic, like the magic in a ley line or in a vein of spell-touched ore. And Serena Reiher had been studying how to speak to it. Not speak in the sense of language, though the research touched on that too. There were notes on attempted communication methods, including light-based signals and tonal patterns that the creature had apparently responded to with something that Serena described, in a rare moment of non-clinical language, as patience. No, Serena was studying how to speak in the magical sense, how to create a channel of arcane communication between the staff she was building and the creature's core resonance, as though the staff were not merely a library of spells, but something intended to be read by something other than a human archivist. Caldwin sat back. Outside the archive room, somewhere above him, the repository continued its daily business. Scholars requesting materials, scribes making copies, the vast administrative machinery of institutional knowledge turning over in its usual rhythms.
He was aware of all of this at a great distance, the way one is aware of weather when one is indoors. He wrote in his journal, "The staff was not made to store knowledge for a Reiher. It was made to communicate something to something else, something that was alive and magical, and that Serena believed could understand it. The unfinished working is not a spell, it is a message." He turned to document 32, which the manifest listed as Research Log, Luminarch Subject, Field Observations, Months 3 to 18. For a long moment, his pen was still above the page. Then, carefully, the creature was real. She wasn't working from theory. She had found one. He read for 3 more hours without stopping. When he finally looked up, the continual flame lantern had not changed. It never did. But his legs had gone numb from sitting, and his journal had gained 11 pages of notes. Brindis Stonemantle was standing in the doorway. He did not know how long she had been there.
"I'll need to come back tomorrow," he said. "I've put a reservation on the room," she replied, which told him that she had expected this and had already decided it was a reasonable use of archive space. He felt, not for the first time, that he and Brindis Stonemantle understood each other in a way that did not require much conversation. He was nearly at the door when something made him pause. He turned back to the table, to the orderly row of documents he had laid out, and looked at document 31, the one with the diagrams. There was a quality to those drawings, a particular care, the kind that a person brought to something they had looked at many times, from many angles, and still found worthy of attention. He thought of what Liz had said, standing at the empty vault plinth. It was the last thing she'd made with her own hands before everything changed. He thought of the creature in the diagrams, its impossible wingspan.
The notation in the margin beside the resonance map, the only place in 12 pages of disciplined scientific prose where Serena had allowed herself something approaching wonder. "It knows that I am there. I believe it is waiting." He closed the door gently behind him. The second day in the archive revealed the gap. Caldwin had returned early, before the repository's main reading rooms opened, and Brindis had let him in without comment and without requiring him to sign the guest register a second time, which was technically a procedural violation, and which both of them silently agreed was reasonable. He had brought his own continual flame stone from his pack, a second journal, and a packet of travel rations that he did not intend to leave the room to replace with actual food. He worked through documents 32 to 41 methodically.
The field observation records were extraordinary. 15 months of detailed, patient documentation of a single creature, apparently living in a remote highland location 2 days east of Aldenmoor's capital.
Serena's notes on the creature's behavior had the quality of long acquaintance. She described its movement patterns, its apparent responses to different weather, the way it arranged the stones in its dwelling area in configurations that seemed to mean something, though she could not decode the system. She described the moment, in month 7, when it had approached her voluntarily for the first time. She had been sitting on a rock at the edge of its territory, recording the sound frequencies of its calls with a spell designed for transcription. It had come and sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth from its body, and for 20 minutes had made no sound at all. She wrote, "I do not have language for what passed between us during those 20 minutes. I am a Chancellor of Arcane Records, and I am aware that this is not a professionally satisfactory sentence. I have written and crossed out 4 attempts at description. What I can say precisely is this. When it left, I understood something about the project that I had not understood before. The staff is not a gift I am making to my family. It is a letter I am writing to this creature, which I have not yet sent." Caldwin read this passage 3 times. The gap he found was in the manifest. Item 42, listed plainly in Serena's neat hand. Luminarch, formal naming record and location index. Secured, secondary archive. Below it, in different ink, newer, though still very old, someone had written a single word. Removed. There was no signature, no date, no explanation. He turned to Brindis's cataloging notes, which she had appended to the box when it arrived at the repository. Her notation for item 42 read, "Not present at intake."
Manifest discrepancy flagged. No resolution found. Status: missing. He sat with this for some time. The naming record and location index. A formal document identifying the creature by the name Serena had given it, and detailing where it had made its home. The one document in the box that would have made everything else findable. Gone before the box ever reached Aelrest. Removed. Not lost, not damaged. Removed. He was still considering this when the archive room's door opened, and a man he had not met came in. He was tall and human, perhaps 40, with the kind of unhurried poise that Caldwin associated with people who spend significant time negotiating at tables where the stakes were high. He wore a scholar's coat, but it was cut better than most scholars could afford, and the ring on his right hand carried a sigil that Caldwin recognized after a moment as belonging to the Arcane Consortium, a private organization of magical researchers based in the southern city of Aldenmoor.
They were not a bad institution, exactly. They were simply one that had historically prioritized ownership of knowledge over the sharing of it. "Ser Mourne," the man said pleasantly. "I'm Aldrich Vane. I understand you've been reviewing the Aldenmoor collection." Caldwin looked at him steadily. "I have." "Specifically, Box 31. Vane came to the other side of the table and looked at the documents laid out there with an expression of calm interest. "I've been tracking that box for some time. You've made rather more progress in 2 days than our researchers managed in 2 weeks, if the manifest layout is any indication." "Your researchers." "The consortium has had an interest in Aldenmoor's pre-collapse arcane research for several years, particularly anything related to Serena Reiher's later work." He smiled, which was not unfriendly. "We believe she was on the edge of something quite significant."
"The sympathetic resonance research," Caldwin said.
Among other things. Vane's gaze moved to the document laid open on the table, the one with the creature diagrams. He made no move toward it. "We would very much like to continue that research with appropriate modern methods and resources. The consortium has facilities that didn't exist in Serena's time. The creature she was working with, if it still lives,
and if it can be found, would be of extraordinary value to that project. The phrasing was precise, value to that project, not cooperation, not communication, value. Value in what sense? Caldwin asked. In the sense that understanding how it generates and sustains magic internally could fundamentally advance our knowledge of arcane energy sources. Its core resonance, properly studied, could unlock. Document 42, Caldwin said. Vane stopped. The naming record and location index, Caldwin continued, removed from this box before it arrived at the repository. Do you know where it is?
The pause was brief but informative. I'm not certain what document you mean. Yes, you are, Caldwin said, not unkindly. Another pause. Then Vane said carefully, the consortium has certain materials relevant to this research that were acquired through private channels. We believe that collaborative work is the most efficient path forward. We'd be very interested in including you, given your direct access to the Sunken Ward survey, and your— His eyes moved, just briefly, to the packed saddlebag in the corner of the room, where the outline of Caldwin's journal was clearly visible. Your notes. Caldwin looked at the open document on the table, the creature in the diagrams, the resonance map, the margin note, written in Serena Reiher's precise hand. It knows that I am there. I believe it is waiting. He thought about what Liz had not told them, about what he had not pressed her on, beside the entrance of the Sunken Ward, because he had learned when to let things sit.
He thought about the letter in his coat pocket, written in copper-haired handwriting on a cold morning in Horrocks Crossing. "Thank you for the introduction," he said. He closed the open document with gentle, deliberate care. "I'll be in the main reading rooms this afternoon if the repository staff need to reach me." He gathered his journals, his notes, and his saddlebag, and left Aldrich Vane standing in the small archive room with the box of Serena Reier's papers and the particular stillness of a man who has just understood that a conversation did not go the way he intended. In the corridor outside, Caldwin walked quickly but without apparent hurry, which was a skill he had spent many years developing, and which he found useful in a greater variety of situations than he had originally anticipated. He needed to write a second letter to Liz Reiher, and he needed to do it before Aldrich Vane thought to have someone watch the courier station.
He did not write the letter at the repository. He wrote it at a small tea house 3 streets away, in a corner table he chose for its sightlines to the door, which was a habit he had not possessed 11 months ago, and had apparently acquired somewhere between the entrance to the Sunken Ward and the current moment. He wrote quickly, in the shorthand he and Liz had developed in their brief but information-dense correspondence, a hybrid of common and Dervan that would be legible to someone familiar with both and opaque to someone familiar with neither. The essential contents were these: the Luminarch was real, the research was real, the working in the staff was designed to speak to it, and there was an organization with resources and intentions that he did not trust in possession of the document that would tell them where to find it.
He sealed the letter with plain wax, no sigil, nothing identifiable, and took it to a courier service on the other side of the city that the Temple of Ioun maintained a quiet account with, for exactly the kind of sensitive correspondence that did not benefit from obvious institutional branding. He paid extra for speed and for discretion, which at this particular courier service were the same tier of service. Then he went back to the repository, because leaving abruptly would be noticed, and being noticed leaving abruptly would communicate something he was not yet ready to communicate. Brindis Stonemantle was at her desk. She looked up when he came in, and then, with the precision of someone reading an invoice, looked back at the corridor that led to the deep archive rooms, and then back at him. "I'll need to make official copies of my research notes from Box 31, he said, specifically documents 28 through 41.
Temple of Aun Protocols. Original research requires registered transcription. This was true. It was also, not coincidentally, the means by which he could ensure that a set of his notes existed in the repository's own records under temple registration, in a form that would be difficult for a private organization to quietly obtain or suppress. Brindis considered this for precisely 2 seconds. "I'll arrange a transcription room," she said. "It may take the better part of the afternoon." "That's fine. You'll want tea. The transcription rooms are cold." "Thank you." She went to arrange it. Caldwin sat in the main reading room and opened his journal to the 11 pages of notes from the previous day and read them through in their entirety, because reading things through in their entirety before acting on them was a practice he had maintained for decades and had not yet found cause to abandon.
The picture assembled by those 11 pages was this. Serena Reiher, in the final years before Aldenmoor's fall, had encountered a creature of extraordinary arcane capacity, a luminarch, apparently a species either vanishingly rare or entirely unknown to the modern world, whose magical nature was not learned but structural, the way a river's nature is not learned but carved. She had spent 15 months studying it, building a relationship with it that her clinical notation struggled to contain, and in parallel building the staff, not as a repository of power, but as a medium of communication. The unfinished working at the staff's base was the last step of that process, the final enchantment that would have made the staff capable of resonating with the creature's core magic, of speaking to it across any distance, of saying what? What was the message? That was the question he had not yet answered, because the answer was in document 42, and document 42 was gone.
He turned to a fresh page and wrote, "What does a scholar send when she knows everything is about to end?" He thought about the earthquake, the bells, the city falling into itself, Serena fleeing north with her children, carrying nothing but the incomplete staff, the 15 months of patient observation, the creature sitting beside her in silence for 20 minutes and leaving her with something she could not put into words. He wrote, "Not power, not a weapon, not a political document, a letter, but to what end?" He looked at his own words for a long moment. Then he wrote, slowly, "She wanted to tell it that she had to leave, and that she was sorry, and perhaps that she hoped someone would finish the sending in time." He was not certain this was true. He was quite certain it was the kind of truth that couldn't be verified from documents alone. The transcription took the rest of the afternoon.
He worked with the repository's certified scribe, a young human woman named Ola, who had the useful quality of transcribing exactly what was in front of her, without appearing to read it in any engaging way. When they were done, Caldwin reviewed the transcription, signed and dated it under the Temple of Aun's registration seal, and deposited one copy with the repository's official intake desk. The second copy went into his saddlebag. He was at the repository's main entrance, coat on and pack secured, when Brindis appeared beside him with the unhurried directness of someone who has timed an interception carefully. "The consortium's representative," she said. "He filed a materials access request this afternoon. Box 31, documents 28 through 41. Did you process it? It's in queue."
Processing takes 3 to 5 days for external institutional requests. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has just made a reasonable administrative decision according to standard protocols. Standard procedure. Caldwin felt something that in a less composed person might have been a smile. "Very good," he said. "The Eastern Road," she said, "if that's your direction. The way station at Farrow's Mill is the last reliable stop before the Highland passes.
He looked at her. She looked back, with the steady, ink-stained patience of a woman who had spent 40 years deciding what knowledge was worth protecting and acting accordingly. "Thank you, Arcanist Stonemantle," he said. "Safe roads," she replied, and returned to her desk as though the conversation had been entirely unremarkable. He stepped out into the afternoon, where Aelrest was going about its business, under a sky the color of brushed pewter. His horse was stabled 2 streets over.
His journals were in his pack. His notes, official, registered, duplicated, were beyond any quiet removal. And somewhere east of here, in a highland location that Serena Reiher had recorded in a document that was currently missing, something vast and winged and patient had been waiting for 300 years for a letter that had never arrived. Whether it was still waiting was a question that Caldwin did not know the answer to. He intended to find out. The letter reached Liz Reiher 4 days later, at an inn in a market town called Oswick that she had not intended to stop at, but had, following some instinct she did not examine, turned off the road to find. She read it standing in the inn's courtyard, horse still saddled, the golden staff wrapped in oilcloth and slung across her back the way she had taken to carrying it, close, where she could feel the faint warmth the brass fittings gave off in certain weathers. She read the letter twice.
Then she turned south, toward the eastern highlands, which was not the direction she had been planning to go, and which was, she recognized with the particular feeling of a thing falling into place, exactly where she needed to be. Caldwin's transcription notes arrived at the Temple of Ayun in Thornwall 7 days after he filed them, routed through the standard institutional post. The receiving archivist, a half-elf named Seren, who had been covering Caldwin's cataloging duties in his absence, read the registration summary, noted the source material, and filed the documents in the Aldenmoor reference collection, which she then flagged as restricted pending senior review, because she had been doing this long enough to recognize when something warranted care. She sent Caldwin a brief note confirming receipt. In the postscript, she added, "The consortium has submitted 2 research inquiries to our temple in the past month, both touching on pre-collapse Aldenmoor arcane studies.
I have answered both within policy. I thought you should know." In Valdenmere, Aldrich Vane wrote a report to the consortium's research council. The report was measured in its language and thorough in its analysis. He noted the repository transcription registration, which had effectively made the core research data publicly accessible to any institution with Temple of Ayun standing. He noted that the location document remained in consortium possession, but that its value had been somewhat reduced by the existence of the transcriptions. He recommended continued monitoring of the relevant parties and proposed a longer-term strategy for obtaining access to the artifact itself. He did not note in the report the particular way the cleric had looked at the creature diagrams before closing the document. He was not certain that it was a relevant professional detail. He found, unexpectedly, that he was not entirely certain it was irrelevant either.
In the eastern highlands, in a place that had no name in any current map, a thing that was not quite a bird and not quite anything else with a name in common use, lifted its head from where it had been resting in the long grass of a high meadow. The evening light was amber and horizontal, the same quality of light that falls everywhere in autumn when the sun forgets to be indirect, and it played along the creature's flanks in shifting patterns. Something had changed in the residue of the world, some faint disturbance in the layer of arcane presence that it read the way other creatures read scent or sound. Something old had been handled with attention. Something that had been dormant was becoming very slightly less so. The Luminarch was not precisely thinking.
It was doing what it had always done, being present, being patient, being available to whatever came next with a quality of readiness that 300 years of waiting had not diminished.
In the meadow, in the evening light, it spread its wings once, not to fly, just to feel the air, and then settled again. The world was a long story, and this was not the last page.